All right, turn to Matthew 13:44, and we'll be kind of looking around at some different passages this morning. But I want you to see a first century Hebrew. He's walking alone on a hot afternoon. They didn't have buses back then. They didn't have Teslas back then or anything like that. And so he's going into the city. He's conducting business, and he's tired because it's important business. He's got to get to this meeting and take care of this business this afternoon. And his feet are starting to blister. His feet are dirty from just walking this dusty roads. His sandals are caked with dirt and dust and grime. And as he's walking, he's like, man, I got to take a little shortcut. And he goes through a field. He walks through a field, and it's uneven, it's hilly, it's rocky, and he's got his staff with him, and he's just kind of sweating and going. And all of a sudden, he thrusts his staff down into the path, and he hears this clunk. And it's a different kind of clunk. It's not the normal staff hitting the dirt or even staff hitting a rock. He hears it, and it catches his attention. So he stops. He hits it again. And he hears it, and then he kicks it, kicks kind of that area to see, and he kicks up some dust, and he sees this glimmer. He sees this light reflect off something, and now his curiosity's got the best of him. He can't help himself. He gets down on his hand and his knees. He's digging frantically, and a few minutes later, he pulls out this little box. A wooden box. You can tell it's been there for a while. The wood is kind of soft with the moisture from the dirt, but it's this wooden box with this little lock on it, and it's got silver trim all around the edges. See, he takes it and he bangs the lock with his staff until it breaks, and you can tell it's been there long. It's pretty fragile. He opens the box and he sees gold coins. He sees rubies. He sees jewels of every sort of color. Man, it's this buried treasure. Man, his heart starts racing. He looks at the coins. They're dated from over 70 years ago, from they're Roman coins. They're 70 years old. This treasure has not been touched for a long time. In fact, this guy that found this, he knows that there's no way the owner of this land even knows about this treasure. His mind and his heart are instantly captured by this treasure. A treasure more valuable than anything he's imagined. It got here, it must have been some wealthy man buried this treasure. They would mark it, and then he died suddenly, and he wasn't able to tell where it was. That was kind of the ancient version of 401ks, burying a box of treasure in the field. The traveler closes the lid, he buries the treasure, and he marks the spot. He's no longer worried about going towards the city to take care of this business. He's now heading home, but he's no longer exhausted. He now skips like a little boy. He's saying, I've got to have that treasure. Then he thinks, I can never afford to buy that land. Then he thinks, man, if I sell everything I have, if I sell my farm, my crops, all my tools, and even my prize oxen, I'll be able to afford it. That should be enough. See, from the moment of discovery of this treasure, the traveler's life forever changes. The treasure now captures his imagination. It is his new center of gravity. This is what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 13:44. This is the story captured in one verse. It says this: the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. See, the point of the story is that when this man found this treasure, his heart reoriented towards it. Here's a question. How many of you felt sorry for the traveler who had to sell his oxen? How many of you felt sorry for, oh man, he had to sell his tools. He had to sell his prized goat, Billy. All right. That was incredibly cheesy. Oh my goodness. All right. Just kind of came out. Sorry. I apologize. None of us felt sorry for him, even though he had to sell everything. Now, the point of this story isn't, first off, it's not to prove that it's okay to deceive people in order to get what you want. That's not the point of the story. And the point of the story isn't saying, okay, you have to go out and sell everything that you have. The point of the story is when you find something so valuable, it changes your life. It becomes your new center of gravity. It becomes what you orient your life around. And so here's when we get a taste of Jesus, all that he is and all that he has done and all that he provides, much like the traveler, our hearts are reoriented around this treasure. Jesus is the treasure above all. We begin to realize that we were not made for this life, but for the next. We were made to live for eternity. That brings us to our big idea for the day. It's a saying that I first discovered in a fantastic book called The Treasure Principle by Randy Alcorn. It's a little booklet like that, and it's about just a kingdom perspective on giving. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it. But he says this: we've got to live for the line, not the dot. Okay, what in the world does that mean? Okay, it simply means, do you remember in math class? Remember in math? Oh, of course, we all just ate up every single word that our teachers just poured out. Karis, did you hear that? We all paid super attention, and we all realized that we would use this for the rest of our lives because it was so valuable. We got it even back then, okay? But do you guys remember in math class when they talked about points on a graph and then they did a line with an arrow on it? Does anybody remember what that arrow represents, that line with the arrow meant? Anybody remember that? Nope. Okay. All right. Well, I'll explain it then. Okay? It means that line goes on and on and on forever. Our big idea is live for the line, not the dot. I'll put it this way, okay? And maybe your teacher did this, and I'm sure you guys all remember this, all right? They took a little dry erase board or a dry erase marker or a piece of chalk, or if you're really old, like a quill and a piece of goat skin or whatever, okay? All right, and they did this. They marked on the board a little dot, okay? They did that, okay? They said, this is a point. This is the point on a graph. And then out of that, I won't do this. I won't really do this with the pen, but they did the line, and then they did the arrow, and they said, imagine that line goes off the dry erase board and around the wall and out the building and down I-71, and it just goes on and on and on forever in that same direction. This is what it means. Our lives are the dot. The lives are the little dot that I can't even see. Even if I go up here, I still can't even see where it is, okay? It's a little blip. And eternity is the line that goes forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And when you think about this, right? A line that goes on forever and ever and ever, it's just dot, 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 dot. A billion, gajillion, fazillion dots right in a row. That's what makes a line, right? We've got to live for the line, not the dot. See, it's easy for us to get caught up in what happens in this little bloop right there. It's easy for us to get caught up in that, in what happens in this little dot that we have of life. Let's think briefly about the dot. Picture this. A man. He walks out of his house carrying a television. He loads it up into his pickup truck, stacks it neatly, gets a stereo system, stacks it in there. He secures it so it's nice and stable and doesn't shift around and doesn't move. And he loads up this pickup truck with televisions and stereos and fancy electronics and all of that. And he takes a drive. And he drives into a lot. And he talks to the man at the front. And he goes a little further. And then in his pickup truck, he goes up this winding little hill, backs up, takes the television out, walks over to the edge, and throws it over the edge. This man's in a junkyard. He does the same thing with the stereos. He does this same thing with his iPhones and his iPads and all of that stuff. See, everything we ever own will end up eventually there. Right? You say, well, I'll give it to Goodwill. Somebody that gets it to Goodwill is going to take it there, right? It's going to end up there. Everything we own will eventually end up in the junkyard. I was laughing at this the other day. I was in my office and I saw a little like iPod Touch or whatever, and I just saw it. And I was like, that's funny. Like it's just there. It's there. Like I haven't touched it in years or whatever. And I remember when I first got it, I was like, oh man, this is awesome. All right. And now it's just in the way, right? Okay. Everything we ever own will end up here. Everything that's currently on your Amazon wish list, right? Okay? That car that when you drive past the dealership, it just calls your name, right? You know that car, you're like, oh man, that's nice. And you're working and you're saving, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. God tells us to, budget our money and to save and all of that. But guess what? That car will end up there too. Everything. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 through 21 says this, don't lay up for yourselves treasures upon earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Everything is fading, everything is rusting, everything is wearing down. And then on top of that, you have the uncertainty of people or situations just ripping it out of your hands. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. A few years ago, PBS, they aired a program called Affluenza, and they gave out some stats. Man, this was convicting and shocking to me, disheartening to me. It says this, the average American shops 6 hours a week while spending 40 minutes playing with their children. Wow. 6 hours shopping, 40 minutes playing with their children per week. By age 20, we've seen 1 million commercials. More Americans declared bankruptcy than graduated from college. In 90% of divorce cases, arguments about money played a prominent role. This is PBS, and their conclusion was material wealth doesn't make us happy. See, this world can't make us happy because we were made for so much more than this world. We were made for eternity. We were made to live for the line. Philippians 3:20 says, our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. See, Christians, we have this hope that on the flip side of this life, we will spend eternity in heaven with our Creator. That's what we were made for. That's what we long for. Hebrews 11:16 says this, but as it is, they desire a better country. That is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. We were made for eternity, and everything we invest in eternity will be given back to us in a better way. Luke 6:38 says this, give and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over will be put into your lap. He's saying if you give, God will give it back to you, and he will give generously. He will not shortchange you. And it doesn't mean you're automatic. You give $10, you're going to find a $100 bill in the parking lot or whatever. It doesn't mean that. He's saying God will give back to you better, because you were made for eternity. And so maybe in the way that God gives back to you is one day when you stand before God, as Revelations chapter 4, verse 10 through 11. In fact, you can turn there to page 1030 in your Bibles if you have one that are in the seats in front of you. You can feel free to turn there. We'll be kind of going through that in a minute. But it talks about casting crowns before Jesus' feet. God gives us rewards for how we've lived on this life, and instantly, instinctively, passionately, joyfully, we say, God, here you are. It is our pleasure to give them to you, because you were the one that saved us. See, in Revelation chapter 4 and verse 4 and 5, these chapters, man, it's describing a scene where we're beginning to enter eternity. We arrive at heaven's gates. We're peering in. This is what we were made for. This is what our hearts have been craving. This is the thing that's beyond the initial rush whenever we get that new little gadget or that bigger house or that raise, that little rush that fades quickly. We've finally realized what we've been truly longing for. It seems too good to be true. We look in, and there is a throne, and it's majestic, and you can tell this is the throne of the entire universe. This isn't some ordinary little kingly throne over some little country or little dynasty. This is the throne room of all the earth, where the King of Kings sits. And it says the one who sits on the throne, he is radiant. He is glowing with perfection. And there's this beautiful rainbow encircling the throne. Man, have you ever seen a rainbow that literally, you see all the colors, and it's from the bottom all the way around? Have you ever seen that? I mean, that is breathtaking. Like sometimes when we see a rainbow, it's like a thin little line, and it's just kind of like about from here to here. But if you've ever seen a rainbow that goes truly from horizon, from the ground, from our perspective, from the ground all the way around to the other side, man, it is breathtaking. I mean, it's amazing. This rainbow is beyond anything that we've ever seen. Even if it's the most beautiful rainbow we've ever seen on this planet, this is next level. And it surrounds the throne. Around this throne, there's 24 smaller thrones, each ornately carved and beautiful. I mean, just decadent. And it says that there's 24 elders, these angelic beings, and they have crowns, and they surround the throne, but they don't even come close to the majesty of this one throne that sits in the center. You hear lightning and thunder rumbling, and you just sit there and you're in awe. there's a perfectly calm, crystal clear sea like glass surrounding it. And the throne seems to come up. And it's just breathtaking. Any words that I try to use to describe it fall so incredibly short. Well, these 24 24 smaller thrones that are surrounding the big throne, they have 24 elders sitting on them. These, along with 4 other angelic creatures, and you know what they're doing? In the most beautiful setting, they are worshiping God, and they're singing Revelation 4:8, "Holy, holy is the Lord Almighty, who was and is to come." And this song echoes throughout the heavens. As we're seeing this, as we're taking this in, our hearts beat out of our chest with excitement. We are at once terrified and yet feel the safest we've ever felt. Because we know that we're in the presence of holy, powerful King of Kings. God is making all things new. At the height of this excitement, we see a book. A book just appears, or we begin to notice it, and we instinctively know that book contains our names. That book contains our reservations to enter into heaven and experience this beauty and holiness of God forever. We know it. And the book, it's there, and we look at it and we're like, yes. And then it sits there. It's unopened. And we look and we begin to get a little nervous. The excitement is replaced with a little bit of uneasiness, and we begin to kind of look around. Like, is somebody gonna open that up and kind of let us in, right? We're going to do that. People are trying to, thousands and millions of saints are gathered around, and they're looking around trying to figure out what's happening. What's going to happen next? And then this question goes out as a whisper. And it gets more kind of panicky as it goes on. It builds and builds. And the question is this: who is worthy to open the book? It begins to echo throughout all of heaven, throughout the crowd of millions. And we look at the 24 elders in all their majesty and all their seeming perfection that still pales in comparison to the one who sits on the big throne. And we're like, are they going to go? If anybody could go, it would be them, right? And they don't move a muscle. They sit there paralyzed, knowing that they are in the presence of absolute perfection, and they dare not even come close to opening that book. The uneasiness grows and it turns to despair. The excitement that we once felt, and we said, man, this seems too good to be true. Now we're like, this seems too good to be true. So close and yet so far. See, we are face to face with God's holiness and our own sinfulness, and the gap is undeniable. We are unworthy, and we will never be worthy. And just as this kind of sets in, there begins another whisper. And this whisper has a different momentum. This whisper brings hope. This whisper says, look here. And all of heaven And all the saints throughout all the ages, they look in the corner and they see the crowd parts. And they see a lamb. A lamb who was slain. But yet, if you look in here, it says he stands. And all of heaven looks at this lamb who was slain. And he begins to walk toward the book. And he opens the book. And heaven and all of the saints erupt in this roar, and they say, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain." He is worthy. He is worthy of our lives. He is worthy of everything that we have. This is the song that we will sing throughout all of heaven because he is truly worthy.